Thank you very much for the welcome. The reason I've got a backup is it might be 2 years ago that we all got COVID, or COVID came into our lives, but I finally caught it and been coughing a fair amount. I've got some slides that I'd like to share with you. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen now and you can all see my slides there. So as Nikki said, brilliant, that's great. So thank you very much. I'm in rainy England and I very much wish I was in slightly sunnier South Africa based on my quick check of the weather earlier. But I am, so I'm head of programs, the CIMA program at BPP. But prior to that, in the 17 years that I've worked at BPP, I've been a CIMA tutor for all of that time. And I'm also a case study subject matter expert. So since CIMA launched their new case study exam in 2015, I have been involved in writing the mock exams and the materials that we at BPP use for the operational level. So I guess that's what qualifies me to be able to talk to you today. In our session today, I'm hoping to look at 4 things and also have the opportunity to answer any questions if there's time at the end, and there should be. Excuse me. So what we're going to talk about is what is the case study exam to start with, what makes it unique and special, perhaps different to any other exams that you've sat before, and why it's a good thing for your employability that you're doing these exams. We'll also talk about how the exams work, the practical aspects of the exams, and they're very much based around a company pre-scene. So we'll be looking at how to approach that pre-scene and the work that you need to do before you enter the exam, and then thinking about how to approach the actual exam when you get there. As I said, before we have chance for any questions at the end. So we're going to start off then with what is a CIMA case study. It's more than just a normal exam. And the reason for that is because it aims to simulate a real life exam in a real life situation in an exam scenario. So rather than just being lots of questions, they're all going to be based around one particular fictitious company. And there are some really great reasons for this. It's because it's going to give you skills that employers are going to value. So it's going to give you some skills then which will make you more employable. It's going to test, therefore, more than just technical knowledge. It's going to test things such as time management, how to talk to your audience. So you might have questions in the case study where you have to talk to the finance director, who you'd hope would have quite a lot of knowledge of financial terms. But you might also have to address a non-finance director, perhaps the managing director or the marketing director, who might not have any clue about the financial standards. So you might have to really explain the information. So talking to your audience is a really important skill for an accountant. Also, in your role at work, you need to be adaptable. Whatever you're doing, you need to be able to respond to information. And there'll be unseen information in addition to the pre-scene. So the pre-scene will tell you lots about the company, but then on the day, there'll be additional information that you have to react to. Another great skill. So it's technical knowledge combined with application. So there are 3 different levels of case study, one at each of the 3 levels of the professional qualification. So the first one is the operational, and you sit that after P1, E1 and F1. So it's using technical knowledge, but it's going to be using it in a very applied way. And it's great for CIMA because it's testing that you are the sort of accountant that they want to go out there and call themselves CIMA qualified. So this is a really busy slide, but don't worry about it. The headline of this is that at the operational case study level, your role is that of a finance officer. So it's the first case study exam and it gives you a junior role, which is that of the finance officer, helping to prepare information to enable managers to make short and medium-term decisions and to implement those decisions. So we're very much here thinking about, you might be asked a question sort of, can you help me pull together this? Or can you take this relevant cost schedule and critique it? Or can you explain this? So we're very much looking at the sort of things that you might see in the role of a finance officer. Once you've done your operational level, you'll then go on to sit P2, E2 and F2, and you get promoted for the management case study exam. You get promoted to the role of finance manager. And the finance manager then is going to be focusing on more longer term decisions and using data and technology. So you're going to be using the technical knowledge from those papers, using E2, E2 and F2, and you're going to be using that to address as if you were a finance manager. And finally then, we've got the strategic case study. The strategic case study is the last thing you do before you become CIMA qualified. And it's demonstrating that the CIMA members can make valuable contributions to the organisation. So here we've got a strategic role reporting to the board, and you're going to be thinking more of a high level, so there's less things that can be directly sort of tagged back to E3, P3 and F3, and it's much more higher level thinking. You're then going to be able to support leaders to develop the strategy and manage and mitigate risks. So it's really going to be getting you through those different layers of the exams, getting you through the layers of the professional qualification, but each time you take on a different role. The great news is, though, that a lot of the skills that you learn for operational case will be there and required for the management case and the strategic case study. And you get into a bit of a rhythm, really. So you do your technical papers, and then you bring all of that together and apply it to this company. I know from my experience of teaching that the operational case study can be a little bit of a shock, a bit like, oh, this is really different to the objective test questions. It's a big translation from sort of the OTs, from the multiple choice and multiple response questions. But as you get used to it, you kind of get into the sort of the feeling of writing, excuse me, writing and developing your answers and using the Preseen information. So next up then is to think a little bit about how the actual exams work. So the exams then, I've got a slide here that I'm going to use to compare them to the objective test exams. So by the objective test exams, we mean things like P1, the management accounting paper, F1, the financial reporting paper, or E1, the paper that focuses on a lot of the digital strategies and the way the organisation is run. Those objective tests are done on a per paper basis. So you sit 3 1.5 hour exams, whereas the case study exam is per level. So the operational case study draws mostly from P1. So it's mostly from the management accounting paper, and that's because CIMA is a management accounting qualification. Good tip, if you haven't already decided on the structure, is to do P1 last before you sit your case study, your operational case study, because it does have so much content from it. In some exams, you might even struggle to identify whether it's P1 or E1. The examining team have said it doesn't really matter. By the time you get to case study, you're giving advice as an accountant, but you shouldn't worry about the individual papers that it comes from, because your boss doesn't care whether you learnt it in that textbook or this textbook. It's about being able to pull the information together. And some of the tasks will bring from different papers. It's a 3-hour exam, so it's a longer exam, and it's human marked. So rather than being something that you can get instant results and sit the exam whenever you like on demand, there are 4 specific sittings per year, and we'll look at those in a moment. But it also means there's an agonising wait. So while the human markers have to get on with marking, you have to wait about 7 weeks to get the results. The high-level themes will be tested. So the blueprints then, which we'll look at in a moment, will provide the topics for the case study exam. Contrast that with the objective test exam, where all of the component learning outcomes are tested. So there's a little bit of refinement, if you like. Some of the sort of the key areas will be tested in the case study exam. But that does mean that you can't ignore areas, because you're going to have to do a written question on them. You might have to write for sort of 20, 30 minutes. So if you've never looked at this topic, you're really going to struggle. So in the case study exam, then, it's long form written tasks. So certificate level and the first 3 objective test questions are all what we call multiple choice, multiple response, or objective test questions. This is time for you to start writing, not writing with a pen, but typing, I suppose we ought to call it, typing exams. And they're called tasks because they've got this competency and application with a real world focus, as opposed to technical. Can you remember which one of the following is true? The other thing about the case study exam is it doesn't involve any calculations. So in the objective test exams, you're going to need a calculator for many of them, especially for P1, and you're going to have to do some multi-step calculations. Whereas in the case study exam, the most you might have to do is add a couple of numbers up in your head, but you won't be penalised if you don't do that. It's not focused on the calculations or the theoretical technical knowledge, because you've already demonstrated your competency in that by passing the objective test exams, or if you're fortunate enough to have got an exemption, whatever you did to get that exemption will have given you that. So what you shouldn't think of the case study as is being a rehash of the technical papers, because it isn't. It's very much about this application and about pulling everything together. So to highlight then the main elements of the case study, it's a 3-hour exam and it's human marked. So someone will take your answer and really think about whether or not it meets the brief and demonstrates the skills that CIMA require. I said that there are 4 sittings per year, and my next slide looks at the exam cycles, because although there are 4 sittings, there are only 2 cycles per year. And the reason for that is that each Preseen, each company that CIMA talk about, is used for 2 sittings. So the Preseens are released about 7 weeks before the first exam sitting, and the first exam sitting is May and November. And then the Preseen that's going to be used in the May exams, the forthcoming exams, will also be used again for the August exams. Now, before you think, well, hey, I might as well do it in August because I'll already know what the questions are going to be, it's not going to be that straightforward for you. They might use the same Preseen, but they have different variants. So it will be different exam papers in the window in August. That said, it does provide a good resit opportunity. If you're unfortunate in May, if you resit in August, or if you resit in February, it will be based on the Preseen that you're already familiar with, so you won't have to get to grips with a new one. The Preseen then varies according to levels and according to how much they've got to say, but it's usually about 26 to 30 pages long. And it will include information such as who are the board of directors, what the company does, which, remember, it's a fictitious company, which fictitious country it is based in. And it will also tell you about the market, the industry. And then it's usually going to have financial information, might have profit and loss account. Hi, if you've got your microphone on, would you mind muting it, please? Because I think we can hear someone's children getting quite excited about case study there. Thanks very much. And it's also got often going to have newspaper articles or things that might tell you where the industry is going. So perhaps a report that's been done, and they come at the end of it, and it'll have information about the tax regimes as well in the fictitious country. So, excuse me, it will provide background information on both the company and its industry. So the exam cycle then, just wanted to explain a little bit about that. And then I just want to talk about the format of the exam, because it's slightly different at the different levels. So the operational case study has 4 tasks, and so does the managerial one, and they're each worth going to take about 45 minutes to do. Whereas the strategic case study, as I said, it's longer, it's more involved, so there are only 3 one-hour tasks. But rather than having to write for 45 minutes on one topic, it will be broken down into a different number of sub-tasks. An operational case study, there's the most variety. You could have up to 4 bullets, 4 separate sub-tasks. Each one, the mark allocation is given as a percentage, and that will help you to work out how long of your 45 minutes you should take. But unlike every other exam, nearly, that you will have sat, once you've completed task 1 and moved on, you cannot go back. And think about it. In real life, if you did something in March and then something else happened in April, you can't wind back to March in your time machine and go back and change what advice you were going to offer. So there isn't the ability to go back. Once you've done a task, you need to have read through it and be perfectly happy with it before you move on, with that balance of time, making sure then that you have enough time to attempt all of the tasks, because you have to be deemed competent across all of them, because your boss isn't going to be very happy if you leave one task completely untouched. And we're going to see an example on the next screen of the way a task is presented with the subtasks broken down. You can see that I've just put a red ring around this. The purpose of this slide then is to show you how the tasks are split. It's not to expect you to be able to answer any of this. This comes from FIS, which is from the 2019 Strategic Case Study Sample Paper or Prototype Paper. But what I want to show you here then is that there are 3 tasks in the Strategic Case Study. Each one is going to be an hour long. So you can use the percentages here to work out how long to spend on each of the tasks. So you should be looking to spend about 33 minutes on subtask A and about 27 minutes on subtask B. Now, obviously, it might not be that exact because you've also got to read and digest the information. It refers to a newspaper article. So you'll need to read that article as well, which you can access by looking at the reference materials. So there'll be the reference materials tab, which you can see my cursor just pointing to here. And you can go back to your Preseen if you need to as well. So in terms then of mark allocations of your overall exam, subtask A is 18 marks and subtask B is going to be 15 marks. So that is just to sort of show you how it's presented. How to approach the Preseen. So the Preseen is important. It's what you get given by CIMA about your fictitious company. And you can see here then that I've just pulled the most recent ones. So these are the ones for the May exam. They do say advanced copy for tutors on them, but they have been released now. So you've got then the Preseens here for the companies, and behind that there will be the sort of 26 pages. Obviously, I'm not going to share those with you now because you're not likely to be sitting these exams. But what do you need to do as Preseen preparation? Well, the first thing I always do when I get a new Preseen is read it. And it sounds really obvious, but just read it from start to finish and get a feel for the company. Don't do anything with it at this point, apart from ponder the company and just think, oh, hopefully I really like that kind of company. Well, that sounds really interesting. I think I'm going to enjoy immersing myself in this. If you feel that it's not really your thing, I'm sorry, but that's what CIMA have picked. So you kind of need to change your mind about it. So read it again and see what you can identify. See if you can pick some issues that are facing the company. We're not doing that to question spot. It's just that it might help you to understand and to brainstorm the company, or to brainstorm the industry. This should also help you to avoid giving advice that is going to lose credibility with the markers. So what you want to do then is make sure that you don't ignore the nature of the industry. So if the market is in decline and you suggest, let's open loads of new branches and expand, well, that's not going to go down particularly well because they're looking for application. You also need to feel familiar with the company. So think about, you know, what's going on with it, what sort of company it does, and try and understand what the product is. No external research is needed, but you might find that it helps. So if you read around the industry a little bit, it might help you to think of factors that could increase demand, or think about things that the company might want to do or might need to invest in. However, there is a bit of a risk with background research, and this comes from the examiners themselves, is that sometimes you can include irrelevant material in your answer because you've read about it and you want to show off. So that can cause you a bit of time pressure. So my advice is always, yes, be aware of the industry. Sometimes we've been doing this a long time now, we even try and think which company it's a little bit like in real life. So we've had companies before that perhaps bear a resemblance to something like Amazon. And you want to do a little bit of background research, but not too much. The one thing you do definitely not want to do is prepare prefabricated answers. So don't try to write an answer of what you think this company should do in every situation, because that is going to demonstrate that you can't respond to unforeseen circumstances and you can't think on your feet. So that's not something that the examining team are looking for. They want you to be able to respond to the situation. So by all means, think about what you think might happen, but don't go in with some kind of pre-planned answer. The blueprints are what CIMA use to define what is examinable. And I appreciate that this is a difficult slide to read, but the reason I've got it here is to show you that for the operational case study, there are 6 different areas, core areas, and each of these core activities will be tested in each variant of the exam. So expect there to be one question on costing, one on budgeting, one on FR, one on working capital, one on short-term decision making, etc. But what you wouldn't expect is every area of short-term decision making to be tested in every variant. Excuse me. I'm not sure if I've said that the exam window is 3 days, and in that window they have multiple exams. So there's no benefit in sitting the exam on day 2 because you won't be able to find out what was in the exam on day 1, for example. It's a different variant each of the days in the window, and then it's a different set of variants again in the second sitting of the cycle. When it comes to the management, we're down to 5 areas and slightly less large blueprint, or smaller blueprint, I guess. But the reason for these set of slides really is that by the time you get to strategic, you can see that actually the blueprint is going to be is much shorter. It's got fewer outcomes because it's more strategic, and they're much more open-ended. So rather than an operational where I can apply cost volume profit analysis, here we're sort of talking about I can evaluate risks and recommend responses. I can pick the best strategy. I can recommend KPIs. So it's very much higher level thinking and slightly harder to map back to the actual technical exams. So in summary, when it comes to the Preseen, know your company. Spend some time and do strengths and weaknesses. Do a sort of pest analysis and a SWOT analysis. Understand the company. Understand its financial position. Does it have money? If it has money, investment in new areas, in new products, in a new production facility, in marketing, in overseas expansion are a lot more realistic than if they're completely broke and struggling to pay the salaries this month, okay? Know your industry. What's happening in the industry? Is it in decline? Is it a booming industry? Are there lots of new competitors coming on board? Because if there are lots of new competitors, putting a price up is definitely not going to be the recipe for success. Know your blueprint. Know what sort of areas you're going to be asked for. So I can, and basically, can you think about what's going to happen? And as I've said before, please avoid prefabricated answers. So one of the examiners has said that they have read examples in the past of answers which the students almost gone, yes, because the topic that they wanted has come up, and they've written the answer that they'd planned in class, or perhaps they've done in a mock exam, but they haven't given thought to the additional information that was presented in the exam, this unseen information. The next area that I wanted to look at then is about how to actually approach the exam. So to do this, we need to know about how the case study is marked. And as I've said, each case study is going to contain tasks from all 5 of the core activities for operational and strategic, and all 6 for, all 5 for management and strategic, and all 6 for operational. And as I said, there will be 6 variants of each exam. So that means that on the a particular Preseen, so the last one for operational, Cushy, there were 6 exams, and we will soon have access to those, so we will be able to see what was tested in those 6 variants. It's human marked, and you have to get 80 out of 150, but that's not the same as saying 53% is required to pass, because the pass rate is still 60%. The reason the scaled scores are used then is because there are these multiple variants. So not everybody can sit the exam on the same day, so they have different variants. And however hard CIMA try, different exam versions will be slightly difficult in terms of their difficulty. Slightly different, sorry, in terms of their difficulty. So we need a way then to ensure that students from the same sitting can be compared despite the fact that they've sat different versions. The scaled scores then represent the industry standard approach to the issue. So don't get too worried or bogged down by the scaled score, but just take away from that the fact that it's fair. Your friend might sit their exam on a different day and have an easier exam, but that doesn't mean they've got an easier ride. Okay? There's no requirement to be competent in all core activities. So you don't have to pass every single area, but you do have to pass the exam overall. And there are no longer any integration marks. So they don't have marks then for talking about things that combine different syllabus areas from the different papers. In terms then of approaching your exam, the best way to do it is to use what we call a tip approach. So the time allocation, think about how long you've got. So for a 45-minute task, you might want to start by giving yourself 5 minutes to do this setup, to do this tip setup. You might then want to give yourself 15 minutes for planning and 25 minutes to write up all of your answer. So the time then given is approximately 1.8 minutes per mark. And so that 45-minute task is going to be 25 marks available, and there are 4 equal tasks. So that's going to come back to 100 marks. So the first thing you want to do then is identify the requirements. It might sound really obvious, but before you start an answer, you need to know what you're being asked to do. It's often easy to spot the requirements, as we saw on that earlier screen, because they're given as bullet points towards the end of the task. And we've also seen then that you're going to get the percentage mark so that you can work out how long to spend on each. Once you've identified the requirements, you can set up the heading for each requirement directly into your answer space, and you can use those then to structure and segregate the different elements of your answer. In most cases, there are 2 marks available for each clearly explained point, as long as that point is correctly and relevantly applied to the scenario. Sometimes there will be exceptions to this, so you might be asked to briefly list something. The word briefly crops up, then you're looking more at 1 mark per point. So for a 12-mark requirement, you might need 6 points to relate back to the Preseen information, the scenario given in the unseen information given in the exam question, or the industry. The unseen information, the information that's provided in the exam, is the trigger information, and you can use that in conjunction with the Preseen to give you stuff to make your answer relevant. When you are planning your approach, then you need to review the requirements to make sure that you have got the right theory and which extracts from an exhibit you're going to need to refer to. And what you need to think about at this point is whether it's asking for a definition or perhaps an advantage or a disadvantage of some theory that you've learned during the course, which perhaps is more likely at the operational level, or whether you're just being asked to provide guidance and advice, which is more likely at the strategic level. The final thing for success then is think about your audience. Speak to your audience. Is the response being directed to a finance or non-financial audience? A non-financial audience is going to require clearer explanation of any technical terms and much less use of any jargon. If they're senior management or operational staff, then that's going to perhaps be different to if they're more junior staff. Also think about the format of your answer. Is it an email, a report, or a memo? And think about the headings that you're going to use for that. So let's have a look then at how we structure our answer plan using something called the PEA approach. So PEA is point, explanation, and application. And you might find it useful to use an approach or a framework such as this to make sure that you communicate your answers in a succinct and professional, concise manner. So the point is, what do we want to say to answer the question? It might be the subheading. So if the requirement's worth 12 marks, then you might need 6 points or even 6 headings. Then we're going to explain, perhaps define the term and provide the advantage or disadvantage. Think about how you do this when you're in the office, in the same way that you would answer perhaps a budget manager at work. And then this is the bit that's really, really important: apply. How does this help the company? Why is it a valid point to make? What could the company do with this information? Why does it matter? So you might want to provide some relevant information from the scenario to help you. So you're going to say why this is relevant. Sometimes you might find yourself applying your point within the explanation, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter which bit of PEA you do it, as long as you make sure that you apply it too. And what we want then is for 2 to 3 sentences to come together to make sure that you're providing the point concisely. And that way, it's not about the volume that you write, it's about the quality of the answers that you write. So 2 or 3 sentences should ensure that your maximum marks are gained if you make the point, explain why it's relevant, and apply it back to the scenario. And you want to space your answers out so that the marker can see that you've made different points. So this is an example then from, actually not from operational, I don't quite know where I put that at the top, sorry. But this is an example from management of what you have to do in a question. So the first thing I'd want to do is think about my time allocation. So subtask A is worth 60%. So that's going to be 27 minutes or 15 marks. And then I need to think about identifying the requirements. What are you being asked to do? I'm not sure if you can read this, but we're being asked to prepare briefing notes for a presentation to the board. So the audience here is the board, but we're being asked to consider financial and non-financial factors. So straight away, if you don't identify that word "and" in the requirement, you're limiting your number of marks if you just talk about financial factors or you just talk about non-financial factors. You're limiting your marks if you only do one part of the requirement. So when you're planning your approach, think about both types and brainstorm financial and non-financial factors. And what we want to do then is think about a swimming pool and prioritise the points. So which are going to be your best points first? So we want to aim for sort of 8 points and have a balance between the two types of factors. And because the audience is the board, any points that we make, we need to explain any jargon that we use. So if we use a technique like sensitivity analysis, which is what they're being asked to do in the second point, we need to make sure that we're explaining what that is. Here is an example then, not for you to read at all, but just for you to see what an answer could look like. And it's split into different paragraphs and it's got headings, it's got financial factors and non-financial factors, and then it's got the points underneath them. So the point of this slide then is to tell you to think about the marker. You don't want to put the marker off before you start. And one way to put them off is to sort of present them with a massive blurge of information. Breaking it down this way, they'll be able to see that you've got a range of different factors. Finally then, just thinking about how it's marked, there's 3 different levels. Level 3 is going to be the best one, obviously, and it's going to give you the most number of marks. So the way that they mark this is based on the level that you hit. And arguably then there is a level 0 as well, which is when there's no rewardable content, so when nothing is going to get a score. And you can see here then that of the 15 marks, you're capped at 8, even if your answer is brilliant for financial, and capped at 7 for non-financial. So in order to be a level 3 answer, you need to demonstrate good technical understanding of the topic with a clear and comprehensive explanation, but crucially, you need to apply it to the business and to the task scenario. And if you use the PEA approach, then you should be able to achieve that. A level 2 score will be because there's an issue. It could be a gap in technical knowledge. It could be that you've identified issues and points rather than explained them. It might be that your explanations are too brief or a little bit muddled, not quite clear enough, or they've not related to the scenario. And as I said, in the worst case scenario, then there's a 0 when there's no rewardable content. This is an extract from the management examiner. The rule of 2 and sometimes the rule of 3. So for a 12-mark answer, it might be possible to come up with 4 issues. And a candidate who aims to write about 4 topics only has to score 3 marks each in order to obtain full marks. So what this is trying to say then is that if you write more points up to a point, then you don't have to put as much detail into them in order to score full marks. My next slide is a little bit about the approach from the strategic examiner. So there are examiners' reports for every Preseen, for every sitting, or every other sitting. And when you're writing up your answers, remember that it's a role-based simulation. Nobody ever goes into a meeting and goes, in my textbook, Porter said, okay, because that's not how we talk. We don't need to do that. We need to talk about sort of in context of the company. Keep your answers relevant. So don't put in stuff that you've dredged out the back of your memory from that textbook to bulk out your answers. Actually, shorter answers can be really good as long as they make the point, explain why it's relevant, and apply it back to the scenario. So keep it short, keep it sweet. Kiss, you're obviously not going to kiss the actual examiner, but that kind of approach Don't find a key word in the requirement and think, right, I am going to tell them absolutely everything I know about that topic. Tasks about valuing businesses, the strategic case study examiner has said, sometimes come with really detailed descriptions of every valuation model, and they refer to those as brain dumps. All you want is information that actually answers the task. So when you're writing an answer, think, why is it relevant? Why would the board care? Who cares why I'm telling them this information? Is it relevant for the company? And I'm just about to feel like I'm really about to start coughing. That's really great, because that's got me to the end of everything that I wanted to say. And there's now time for any questions, if there are any.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You already, somebody is applauding. I applaud with them. It's fantastic. I love it. There are a couple of things that I love. I know people are dying to ask some questions. Maybe some of my questions cover it. You did say in the beginning, operations case study draws mostly on P1, which then led to everybody saying, and what is management case study? And what is strategic case study?
There's more balance across the other ones. So it's an operational case study that there is the biggest sort of driver of P1. When it comes to the management case study, it's fairly balanced. There isn't one dominant paper when it comes to that. And when it comes to strategic, it's not as heavy as operational, but E3 is probably the one to do last, because E3 is the one which is the biggest component of the strategic case study. So my advice, if you're thinking about ordering your qualification, is do F1 and E1 and then do P1 as the last paper before your case. Do them in whichever order you want at managerial, but be warned that F2 has got a bit of a beast of a syllabus. And then at strategic, do F3 and P3, and then do E3 before you do your exam.
Excellent, excellent. You said in the demonstration, you said, and here, when you are on the platform, this is where you can go look at the Preseen in your exam. Why would you do it, and is it even wise? Or is there a very good reason one must go look up something in your Preseen?
Even if you've read it loads and loads of times, Nikki, you might think, oh, what is the overhead absorption rate per labour hour? And you might want to go and look up a fact from it. So if you know the Preseen well enough, you will know that on that page, you can see that there is something that you need, and you might want to go and look up a figure, or you might want to go and look up something that will give credibility to your answer. Or you might just think, well, actually, if I look at the Preseen, it gives me details about the production process, so I can have an applied example. I can talk about the components that go into making this product. So a recent operational one was about trainers. So you could go back and say, the cost of the trainer represents whatever percentage of the selling price. So it's really important to keep that cost under control. And that fact from the Preseen will give you real credibility with the marker, and it's worth spending time rather than doing that sort of brain dump about everything you know about costing. And
I imagine it's very good to go look something up, but it goes without saying you need to know the Preseen so well that you have you know where you're going to find it. You don't want to go scratch around and waste time.
No, you don't. You want to know roughly what's on what page, and if you've committed it to memory, that's absolutely fantastic. And by the time you've done mock exams, you'll be surprised how much you know about that company and how much you know about it, and that's excellent. But we also know that in the exam, it's really easy to kind of have a sort of a moment of panic where you start to doubt yourself. So it's good to know that it's there to refer to if you need it.
And then the other thing that I like that you said, when you get the Preseen, first read it through, do nothing. And I always say when we have our open days and I speak to new students and say, when we send you your study material, your BBP books, the worst thing you can do is open it and start studying.
Yes.
You should open it and just start reading. It's such amazing content, and just see, what is this about? And so it was quite nice that you reflected that. Yeah, enjoy it. Totally, it's so good.
So during the case study work that I've been doing, my colleague Sally and I always just go, oh, do we like it or don't we like, you know, sort of, you know, what do we think about the company? And we always just chat about the company as if we were applying for a job there, rather than going to sit an exam about it. And sometimes it gets us thinking about, you know, things we hadn't known we wanted. And you might find that you get lots of adverts for trainers or something popping up in your news feed for a while because you've been Googling it or whatever.
Yeah. Then just on a point of, just to be 100% sure, you said you can look at the blueprint. It shows the examinable areas. So I think the terminology is like, what is examinable or how it is examinable. And is it right that all core activities will be covered in the exam? Differently, but every core activity will be covered.
Yes, you should be prepared for every single one to be covered. It might only be a small amount, but you should expect that there will be an element, even if perhaps to your untrained eye as a student, you might think, oh, is that one, or that one? It doesn't matter, but yes, they will cover them.
Excellent. Then